All right, cool. So we're recording. So this is a book called Going to Meet the Man. But the book is comprised of nine short stories, excuse me. So it's comprised of nine short stories. Um, and the opus of the stories is the story that you guys read, Going to Meet the Man, which is also what the book is titled after. Um, it was published originally in 1948, so this is when it first made its appearance to the world in 1948. But a couple of things before we kind of get into the content, right? Like, one, the book is a collection of stories. You guys read one of those short stories, so we have to think about, what does a story do? What is the purpose of the story? Why does Baldwin choose to engage in storytelling opposed to essays or any other forms of writing, right? So we have to think about the importance and the significance of a story. How effective is his method of storytelling, right? Did he use this canon of storytelling to produce an effective thesis, right? And then in this particular story, so one is a conversation about the role of storytelling as a whole, right? But then more particularly, this specific story, how does Baldwin use this story? What is Baldwin up to in this story? What is he trying to get you to think about as a reader on the implicit and explicit level, right? So one thing when talking about Baldwin, especially because you guys never read Baldwin before, he has what I call the pillars of white supremacy, or what I'll going forward call white inferiority, and I'll explain that a little bit more. But who could tell me what a pillar does? What is the significance of a pillar? What does a pillar do? What is it meant to do?
Hold, like a structure.
Yes, it holds the structure up, right? So Baldwin presents us two pillars of white supremacy, what we commonly call it, but I'm going to call it white inferiority, because it's really not a system of superiority, right? They're not innately superior. They have set up a structure to support their idea of superiority, but is really grounded in their inferiority. Okay, so that's why I'm going to refer to it as white inferiority. So the two pillars of the white inferiority complex are, one, the white imagination, and then the second pillar is the maintenance of white innocence. You guys should definitely take notes of this and write this down. So the two pillars of white inferiority are the maintenance of white innocence, so maintaining this idea or this notion of white innocence, and the white imagination. So when we talk about the white imagination, it shows up quite a bit in this. It shows up quite a bit in this essay. It also shows up in a variety of Baldwin's other essays, and as well as the maintenance of white innocence. But I'm gonna provide some examples, and then as we work through the story, we'll kind of highlight those examples. So this idea of the white imagination, right? If you think about Hollywood, right? Hollywood is a production of the white imagination, right? That's a personification of the white imagination. Think about what movies are. Think about what media production is. It's someone's imagination, someone's visual imagery that they're able to bring to life, right? If you think about the structure of Hollywood, it's a predominantly white space, right? And just as of now, as of late, there's been a push. Well, I'm not gonna say as of late. As of late, the conversation has picked up a lot more around diversifying Hollywood, right? A couple years back, we had things like Oscars So White. But again, I bring this up to show you just an example or a depiction of the white imagination. You guys are young, but I don't know if those who have taken film courses, you may have came across the film like Birth of a Nation by D.W. Griffith. Has anybody heard of that film? All right. So just a really brief tidbit about that. So the Birth of a Nation, and I'm sure as you guys do decide to take Pan-African Studies courses throughout your career at Cal State LA, if you take TV and film courses throughout your career at Cal State LA, you will come across this film. But this is widely celebrated as the apex of filmmaking, right? From the technological standpoint, as far as the types of shots that was made, but then the content of the film also becomes important considering the time. D.W. Griffith tells a story of a white woman being raped. This is during the time of Reconstruction, right? So you have Black people who are in office. They're holding positions as mayors, senators, etc. But all this happens while all this is going on, excuse me, a white woman gets raped. And the town gets up in an uproar with this rape of this white woman, with this white woman. And in the process of her trying to avoid the rape, she throws herself off the mountain, right? So now the town is kind of gathering to say, what are we going to do about this? They need to bring justice to the white woman who was murdered. And they also have the problem of the Black people being in office, right? And then they show these depictions of Black people in office, feet on the desk, they're eating watermelon in the office, they're eating chicken in the office. So these very stereotypical images of Blackness, right? And they're saying we have these circumstances like white women being raped and murdered because of Black folks being in office and them not being able to uphold the law, right? So this is the movie that gets produced, right? So this movie gets shown in the White House. This movie gets circulated throughout the nation. And what happens also in the movie, right, the Klan comes and they save the day, the Ku Klux Klan. But after the movie gets viewed and gets circulated across the United States, there's a rise in Klan activity. So the Klan kind of is dispersed. Then the movie gets produced and gets shown, and the Klan starts to manifest itself a little bit more and be more active, right? So again, the white imagination, this movie, A Birth of a Nation, is producing a reality in the way that white people view Black people, view the fear and the need to fear the Black body, and then this idea of the over-sexualization of the Black body, right? So the Black man is a brute, is one of the tropes that you'll get in Hollywood imagery around Blackness, right? They're over-sexualized. Their only desire is to have and be with white women, right? And it's an insatiable desire. It drives them mad, right? This is how they're depicted. So this is the white imagination at play in the way that Blackness becomes understood. And you see this play out in the story that Baldwin writes. So let's take this idea. Okay, so that's the white imagination. We'll put that on pause. So that's one pillar, right? The second pillar is the maintenance of white innocence. Think about Manifest Destiny, right? That says that God, wait, before I get into that, who knows or who have heard of Manifest Destiny before? Eileen, yeah, Eileen, can you explain to us what's Manifest Destiny, one of you guys?
I could explain it if you want. Basically it was like the idea that like white, or like I guess they had to take over the land, like they were destined to have that land.
Yep. Exactly. So, and God gave them, right, the authority and the divine right to take over that land, right? So this is what's important about Manifest Destiny. So that's the idea, but how did that play out in real life, right? People were killed, people were raped, people were murdered. We're just supporting Indigenous Peoples Day. I'm not gonna put air quotes. I was gonna say Columbus Day, so I did the air quotes, but we're just celebrating Indigenous Peoples Day, right? Reason why we're now calling it Indigenous Peoples Day is because the atrocities of Christopher Columbus, right? Those are the same atrocities to be found in this idea of Manifest Destiny. But what's important as it pertains to the Baldwinian notion of maintaining the white innocence is all the atrocities are okay because you're civilizing people. It's not rape because you're bringing them Christianity, right? It's not murder because they're heathens and they need to find Jesus, right? So that maintains the white innocence. So I'm not a terrorist, right? I'm a missionary, and I'm here to bring the good word of God. So therefore, I'm innocent, right? There's nothing wrong with me. The problem is them. Therefore, I need to come in and make sure that everything is okay, right? Iraq is being unfair to the way that they treat women. We need to go and give Iraq their democracy, right? I'm not going to talk about how I'm going to go in there and snatch up oil, but we're going to talk about how I need to come in and be this voice of reason for the Iraqi people. This maintains the white innocence, right?
Like also in American imperialism, when America tried to conquer all the like islands between the Pacific Ocean to be in power of the trade routes.
Yeah, absolutely. Exactly, right? And where the innocence comes in at, right? They were doing that to civilize those lands, right? They were doing that to the benefit of to Mother Europe, right? So it's nothing wrong with that. It's just expansion, right? So this is this idea of the maintenance of white innocence. Well, you know, Breonna Taylor, she had some involvement with illegal activity, right? So this, what the police did wasn't really that bad. She was a criminal, right? Mike Brown, he stole a blunt before he walked out the gas station. So if he wouldn't have did that, then, you know, the cops wouldn't have shot him, you know? If Trayvon Martin would have been walking through that neighborhood, then George Zimmerman wouldn't have to follow him and kill him, right? Amber Geiger, she was just confused. Didn't know what floor she was on, so she busted in the wrong house thinking it was hers. Innocence, right? And this is how these two ideas interplay. So we talked several times about what the role of the police department is under the Constitution, right? How the role of the police is not to play judge, jury, and executioner, but to take you into custody so you could go to a trial of your peers and then face a trial, right? That's justice. But the way that it plays out in our time, police arrive to the scene, they'll assess the scene, make a judgment call that ends up taking someone's life. Typically, it's a person of what I'll call culture, not color. 1 second. So what I would call that, right, is homicide. Like, let's take out all the symbolisms and all, just call it what it is. That's homicide. You killed a motherfucker. Ain't no way around that, right? That's not even what your job title is for. You committed a homicide. So this is where the white imagination comes into play, right? The homicide gets effaced because of what? I was afraid for my life, right? This unarmed Black man, he's unarmed, but I have a tactical vest, I have riot gear, I have a mace, I have a baton, I have handcuffs, and I have a gun, right? But somehow, some way, this unarmed Black man who was walking away, who had his hands up, who is in a chokehold, all these varying circumstances, right, made me afraid, right? This Black woman, this Black child made me afraid. Now, if we are to look at this from a logical standpoint, there's no way in hell that somebody with a gun should be afraid of somebody that's unarmed, right? Have you ever heard the term, never bring a knife to a gunfight? Y'all heard of that before? Saying that's a dumbass premise, right? If you try to fight somebody with a gun, with a knife, you're gonna lose, right? Don't do that. So if that's a logical saying that we all understand within the society, how does it become logical then that an unarmed person can threaten somebody with a gun, who has been trained, right, to be in tactical situations and how to handle arms, right? That becomes illogical. But this is where that white imagination comes into play. This is where the movie Birth of the Nation by D.W. Griffith comes into play, right? Because it makes this idea of Blackness larger than what it really is. Think about, I don't know, you guys, it may be a little bit different. So me growing up in the 90s, there was very few times that you would see Black people on the TV screen or on what they call the silver screen, or on the movies, right? Very specific depictions that we got, especially for Black manhood. And one of the most prevalent depictions was the gangster, right? Gangster rap, gangster movies. So Boys in the Hood, Menace to Society, Belly. I could go through a whole canon of movies that are these gangster films, right? And these all add to this idea or to this notion of fear that pervades in the minds of non-Black people, right? If you listen to the news, think about how situations are depicted and articulated when somebody who is Black is being described, right? Juxtapose that to how somebody who is being described that is white. I think about, I don't know, it's a couple years ago, the dude who went to Stanford and he got caught. I don't know if y'all heard about this. He got caught behind the dumpster trying to rape a girl at a party, right? And they literally did not give him a sentence because they did not want him to have his college experience imposed on, right? So this is the rationale. This young white boy who is literally raping women, who's caught in the act raping women, right? We don't want to fuck up his college experience. So we'll just give him a slap on the wrist and you go on about your business. We'll do a juxtaposition to individuals like Brian Banks, who was a football player at Long Beach Poly, received a scholarship to go to USC, right? He gets falsely accused of rape, spends time in prison, does not get to attain his scholarship, circumvents his potential for going to the NFL, right? Only to find out 5 years later that he was falsely accused and now they let him go. But they assumed automatically his guilt, right? Because this is what Black men do. We've been trained to view Black men in this depiction, right? So this is the fear that gets cultivated. It gets put in everyone's mind. And when the police says, "Oh, I was afraid," now because we all been pushed and forced this image of Black people as violent, as Black people as maniacal, as Black people as deviant, right? It makes sense why he was afraid, shit. So now it becomes what? Justifiable homicide, right? And that's the term that they use to maintain the innocence of the white man or the white woman who kills these Black individuals or these people of culture, right? So this is how the white imagination interplays with the maintenance of white innocence in a very quotidian and a very daily basis in this society, right? The fear that is unjustified, this fear that is irrational, this fear that's only produced from the white imagination becomes the scapegoat, becomes the rationale, becomes the justification for homicide. Hence, justifiable homicide. And that's where the white imagination and the maintenance of white innocence interplay, right? So these are Baldwinian concepts. And as we get into the reading, you'll see those kind of come to the fold, right? So we have to keep in mind the maintenance of white innocence and this idea of the white imagination. Also, what becomes very present in the story is anti-Black terrorism, right? The over-sexualization of the Black body. Think about this, they talk about on page 230 when the protagonist, Jesse, right? He said he would go into the Black part of town and arrest women when he kind of gets bored with his wife, right? Again, this idea of over-sexualization of the Black body. But then also on the back of that, he became attentive to the fact that I can no longer do that because now there's an uprising in the Black community. And the last thing you want to do is get ran up on with your pants down, right? So he's like, yeah, I can't do that no more. So if you're paying attention and reading closely, you could tell that there's something going on the Black side of town where the Blacks are in a state of unrest, right? We talked last week about this idea of Black subversion and the story of the bear and the lion, right? We see Black subversion come into play in this story as well. Think about how Jesse thinks about his interactions with Blacks, right? And he says, "Oh, yes, yes, Mr. Jesse, we thank you, Master Jesse. Thank you, Jesse," right? And they're all welcoming and becoming to him. He's like, well, they like me. He has this thought in his mind that they like me, right? But if you're paying attention and you're reading closely, you know that that's not the case. And that comes out to play in the 10-year-old boy in the front of the house, right? But what I want you guys to be aware of are the Blacks who are interacting with Jesse. They take on this yes, Master Jesse role to subvert this idea and to undermine this idea and to keep him thinking that he's in their good graces, right? But all the while, the other time, when the doors close and when he leaves, they talking shit about Jesse, right? That's why the 10-year-old has this idea about Jesse and interacts with Jesse in the way that he does. He's informed by his elders. He's informed by his parents. He's informed by his cousins, right? Like for those who, I don't know if y'all have kids, but if you have younger brothers, right, you know that they listening. If you have younger sisters, you know that they're listening, right? So this idea of subversion becomes important. I don't know if you guys but there's this very implicit notion of Black voter suppression taking place in the story, right? Also, we see the white innocence come into play when he describes on page 232, where he talks about when the boy is in the cell and his foot slips and hits him in the jaw, right? So he didn't kick him in the face, but his foot leaped and met the boy's jaw, right? So again, it's not a violent act, it's just a slip of the foot, right? The maintenance of white innocence. the song and what is Baldwin doing with this song, right? You have the interpretation that Jesse has that the song is their song to God, songs for their personal salvation. And then he also kind of felt that those songs may be for them singing for his salvation as well, right? That's one interpretation of the song. Then we have the Boy in the Cells interpretation of the song. He says, we're going to sing you motherfuckers till you're crazy, right? This is what he tells them. And then also he says, they're singing the white man into hell, right? That's another interpretation of this song. So what is Baldwin doing with these songs? And then we also see on page 236, the maintenance of white innocence come into forefront as well, because Jesse never thought much about being a good person, right? But he tried to be a good person, right? And then he goes on to say that all of the things that he would do that would be quote unquote bad is because the black folks don't know how to act, right? If they would just listen to what the police said, then we would be okay. If they just listened to what the Bible says, then we would be okay. I wouldn't have to do these things. I wouldn't have to enact these terror on these communities, right? So again, he's innocent. He's not the problem. They're the problem. And then we have the idea of the picnic, right? What is the picnic? What is the historical significance of the picnic? Just so you know, right, and just to be explicit with you guys, historically, what a picnic meant is to pick a nigga and hang him. That's exactly what a picnic is. So when you say we're going to have a picnic, what you're invoking in a historical context is what Baldwin is detailing in this story, a lynching. That is what the significance from historical concepts of the picnic, right? So we have to be aware of that. And then think about there's a line in there where he says all of these men were his role models, right? They were all his father's friends. They taught him how to be a man. So this notion of white terrorism being passed down like baseball, you know what I mean? Like, we're gonna go watch a game, I'm gonna teach you how to be a man, and by witnessing this horrific act, right? Then he mentions on page 237 the explosions that would take place in the town, right? And this notion that, well, I hope those explosives don't get in the wrong hands, right? So what does that mean? What is he saying by that, right? So obviously the explosion that they were doing were white folks blowing up black folks' shit, right? But then he hopes that those explosives don't get in the wrong hands. Again, the white imagination at play, right? Then he mentions that if the town were more segregated like towns in the South, then we could just kind of go through and just burn up the black side of town and get rid of this problem, right? So this is the way that they seek to deal with the issue, but again, they want to maintain their innocence. On page 242, they mentioned it was like a 4th of July picnic. Again, I articulated you guys what the picnic signifies, and then think about that, merging it with the 4th of July, right? So the celebration of independence, right? This is how we're gonna celebrate Independence Day, with the hanging of a black man, right? And then Otis, right? Jesse's childhood friend, Otis. And, you know, he hasn't seen Otis in a couple of days, right? And I don't know if you guys peep, but childhood Jesse is very attentive to the way that the blacks move throughout the community, right? He noticed that, man, there are none on the street today, where normally when I drive past the street, they're all out, you know, handling their daily business. I ain't seen Otis in a while, right? Normally when I have questions, Otis is the person I'm asking these questions to, right? I haven't seen Otis. Also, within the dynamic between Otis and Jesse as children, right? Think about this. Think about all the questions that Jesse wanted to ask his dad, but he didn't or he couldn't. But those would be questions that he would normally pose to Otis, right? So what does that say about the knowledge of race that black children possess, juxtaposed to the knowledge of race that white children possess, right? So there's something that Black children are being told by Black parents that white children aren't being told by white parents. Hence, Jesse needs to ask these questions to Otis because Otis has all the answers, right? So to me, what's at play there is survival, right? Think about the video we watched last week with Ryan Coogler. He says, you know, every Black parent has to have this conversation with their child of what's it mean to be Black in America, right? And you have to do that as a means of survival, right? So if we were to take that information and apply that to what's going on between Jesse and Otis, we have to assume that these talks are going on in Otis's household, and these talks are happening because they want Otis to live, right? Talk about the picnic being a town attended event. Jesse says when he's up on his father's shoulder, it looks like there's millions of people in attendance, right? At least hundreds of people. So again, the whole town is attending this atrocity, right? And then he asks the question. He doesn't ask it verbally, but the question is in his head, right? What did the man do? What did the man do, right? So again, the white innocence at play because he had to do something to bring this upon himself, right? It couldn't be that white folks are just maniacal and they have fun doing these type of things. He had to do something wrong, right? And then for those who are into philosophy, right, we have this idea of the Oedipus complex. Has anybody heard of that? No. So the Oedipus complex is a Greek legend of a boy who has a sexual desire for his mother, right? We see that play out in this text as well, because as Jesse's on his father's shoulder and he's witnessing the man getting lynched and burned, he looks over to his mother, and her mother, although she looks strange, right? She's never looked as beautiful in her life within that moment, right? He's found a beauty in his mom while she's witnessing this horrific event, right? Keep in mind the Oedipus complex. Also keep in mind that, well, coupled with that, right? His mother never looked so beautiful, but he never also felt more love for his father within that moment also, right? So watching a man getting burnt, his mom was the most beautiful he ever seen her, and he felt as closest and he felt most love with his father in that moment. What does that say about the psychology of these individuals? Also within the Oedipus complex, right? Think about how the story starts off and what Jesse was unable to do, right? And then think about once he thinks back to this moment, what he is able to do after that, right? Think about the Oedipus complex. Also, the anti-Black terror that plays out at the sexual level, right? Think about what they did with the knife towards the end of the story, what part was removed, right? How he chose to describe the part, right? How big it was, how heavy it was, right? The sexualization of the Black body, and then the terrorism that plays out at the sexual level should also be something that's thought about. And then again, as I mentioned, once Jesse's able to think about all these things and recollect these things in his memory, he's able to be aroused and able to perform that act with his wife, right? So has anybody heard of epigenetics, the term epigenetics? Has anybody heard of the post-traumatic slave disorder or post-traumatic slave syndrome? So I see you shaking your head a little bit, Eileen, so it sounds familiar, but you may not know. So there's a scholar named Joy DeGruy Tyson, I believe. I could be wrong with the last name. It's Joy DeGruy something. And she produced a book called The Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome. And it's a book on epigenetics. And essentially her thesis is that the horrors of the enslaved institution are passed down in the genes of African people from generation to generation to generation to generation, right? And we could think about this from a theoretical standpoint, but we could also think about it from a very practical standpoint, right? Mothers carry their child in their womb for 9 months before the child is brought to the surface, right? So think about all the tragedies and all the traumas that you go through within that 9-month period holding a baby in your stomach, right? We now know that trauma and stress have a physiological effect on the body, right? So if this is true, So the physiological effect that comes to play by these trauma and these stresses that the mother feels are naturally passed down to the child because the child is in the mother's womb, right? There's even studies that say that from the food that we eat, right? So for those who eat beef and chicken and things of that nature, the stress that the cows are in before they die gets transferred to you when you eat that cow, right? So that has a physiological effect on your body, right? So these are scientific studies that are taking place. So what post-traumatic slave disorder or epigenetics says is we're literally transferring trauma to our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren for generation to generation, right? So I explained how that plays out for the women. The same for men, right? So men, we hold our sperm, right? They say that we have up to 7 generations that we hold, right? As far as our offspring. So if this is true, and if trauma has a physiological effect on the body, then it's also having an effect on those 7 generations that we hold, right? So this is the science of epigenetics. We're passing down traumas from generation to generation. So one night I was talking to my fiance and we were talking about this idea of epigenetics. And every time, for the most part, when epigenetics is studied and understood, it's always looked at from the prism of how Black folks or how African people are passing down these traumas, right? Well, my fiance says, well, if that's true for us, it has to be true for them too. Right? That's just, right? It's fundamental. So if we're passing down these traumas, what are they passing down by enacting the trauma, right? So how does the slave master who beats somebody for a living pass down those experiences to his child, to his children's children, right? Baldwin is dealing with this. That's what he's talking about. He's talking about it being passed down like a tradition, right? You're teaching your son this, like Jesse's dad was taught from his father, right? Like Jesse will pass down to his son, right? So that's one way that this plays out on the traditional level of passing down norms, right? But what I'm thinking about is how does this play out in a psychological level from a standpoint of genes, right? What are you passing on? And then I'm thinking about a lot of these Karens that you see on going viral today, right? And they look like they're fucking out of their mind, right? They look like there's literally something wrong with you. Like, why does wearing a mask upset you so much to where you can't function like a normal person, right? Maybe it's epigenetics. Maybe the insanity that feels that it's okay to lynch somebody, burn somebody, castrate somebody, pass around the body parts. Because another thing that Baldwin mentions, right? What the fire did not finish, the people came and finished, right? There has been numerous amounts of articles, books written about how when, especially in the South, the North too, homes would get sold, like these old estate homes, right? And when they start to excavate the house and kind of clear out the house, they would find literal body parts of people. Because what would happen, once the picnic is over and they castrated the person who was hung up, somebody would take the hand, somebody would take the foot, somebody would take the nose, somebody would take the lips, somebody would take the ear, and they would keep them as souvenirs. Now, if you don't believe me, look the shit up, right? I want you guys to be critical. Don't just believe it because I'm telling this to you. This is American history, right? So they would pass these things around like souvenirs. The images of the bodies being burned would be passed around as postcards, right? So this was memorabilia. This is American history memorabilia, okay? These were called spectacle lynchings. What is a spectacle? Somebody describe for me the importance of a spectacle. Nobody knows what a spectacle is?
Yeah, like a viewing.
Right. It's something to be made public for everyone to see, right? Spectacle lynching. So they would lynch it in a public space so the whole city would be able to see it, right? One part of town would come out and celebrate it, hot dogs, popcorn, you know, it's a jovial event, right? But the other side of town, which Jesse astutely noticed, Nobody was outside on the black side of town, right? I ain't seen Otis in a minute, right? So another part of the spectacle is to let the black folks know, if you get out of line, this is your fate, right? So I want to bring this to today's. So if you think about your third paragraph in your journal, how does this relate to what's going on today? We take this idea of spectacle lynching and apply it to our time. What's the first thing? So what made the George Floyd situation so popular? This is a question I'm asking. Why did it get so much attention?
It was spread across social media.
Exactly, it spread across social media. You guys probably don't remember this, Rodney King, right? What made Rodney King's circumstance so prevalent is it was captured on film, right? So what's happening now is anytime that someone's murdered by police, anytime that someone is harassed by police, the first thing that we're trained to do is grab our cameras and capture, right? Which is good because it brings exposure to these circumstances, right? Now, American people can no longer say that police brutality in the black community is not a thing, right? We cannot say that because everybody's seen this. But what also happens, right? You see it, and what do you do when you see it? You spread it around, right? Spectacle lynching in 2020 is the sharing of these deaths so everyone can see, right? Has the same effect as it did in the way that Baldwin's writing about it, right? Some white folks are celebrating it. And again, I don't want to, there's a difference between people who are white and this idea of whiteness, right? So we got to keep that separate. But also what this is doing is spreading trauma to people who look like the victim, right? It's no different from having to go out and watch or witness somebody being hung from a tree, right? It has the same affect on your psychological experience for those who occupy and look like the victims of the spectacle that we continue to pass around, right? So again, it's important because it brings exposure, but there's a very thin line between exposure and spectacle, right? And that's something that we need to contemplate in our present, in our current moment, is, what is the real effectiveness of this method of activism, right? And what is the affect of this method of activism? So those are the things that I find of interest for the book. Let's just we'll do a real light fishbowl. I just think I think everybody on here is fishbowled already. Sandy, have you fishbowled? Sandy?
Hello? Yes, I have. Do you want me to fishbowl again?
No, if you already went, you're good. Diana, have you fishbowled already also?
Yeah.
Yeah, I already fishbowled.
Chelsea, have you fishbowled?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think everybody that's here has fishbowled already. So let's do this. Let's just open up. Yeah.
I have not fishbowled yet.
Okay. Is there anybody else who has not fishbowled? And like your grade is on it, so you could like be slick if you want to, but I know who hasn't. If I get to my notes, and if you don't do it, you will not get your participation points.
I haven't either.
Okay. Are you prepared to fishbowl?
Actually, can I skip though?
Yeah. Ingrid, yeah, you can skip. Ingrid, have you fishbowled already?
Yeah.
Okay. Lizette, have you fishbowled? All right. So, Jamina, are you prepared to fishbowl today?
Yeah, I can.
Okay. Nicole, if I can throw you a softball just so you can save your pass. If you want, we could just talk about some of the things that I already mentioned, just as it pertains to what you thought about the reading, or you could just talk about anything that you thought was of interest in the reading, or you could keep your pass. It's up to you. But just know you only have one per semester.
Okay, I'll go.
Okay. So you two would do our fishbowl. Again, talk about whatever you want, or you could pull from something that I spoke about when I was kind of going over what I found of interest.
I can go first. So, honestly, this reading was very disturbing to me. It was something that I have never have read before, like in that context. But what I found interesting in the reading was how they kind of like felt joy with everything that they were doing. It was something that they were, well, it was something that was like something they were used to doing. And what I found like kind of interesting was how like violence was like the main source of everything that they were doing to the people. And like in the quote on page 235, he said Jesse wanted to go over him and pick him up and pistol whip him until the boy's head burst open like a melon. And like in the sentences below, it was like his like rage of like anger towards like towards the boy. So I don't know, it was kind of interesting how like that was like kind of the main thing that like he talked about in like part of the reading,
Yeah.
where he wanted to hurt them physically. Like that was like the main thing that they did.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty much it.
It's a very good point. I mean, it really is a whole story about violence, right? Like, I mean, to me, like the major themes are violence and sensuality or sexuality, right? Like that's the prevailing theme.
So going based on what you said about how people find out. So I feel like now today social media is really like a popular thing where we see actually crimes happen and violence happen because they record it for the people to see. And I guess now people, since they see what's going on, they try to stand up for it. And some crimes are not recorded, and some people do not find out. So I think that this is how people tend up to like find things out based on social media. So yeah.
So I mentioned, you know, there's kind of two prevailing themes here. One, which is very obvious and in your face, is the violence, of course, right? Which is also the other part is not so in your face, but it's obvious, right? The sexuality there, right? And if you think about how Baldwin starts the story out and how Baldwin ends the story out, that's where you see the sexuality come into play, and really how they interplay, right? So because of the violence, it allows the protagonist to get an erection, right? So what do you think Baldwin is trying to do with that part of the story? What do you think the significance of that is?
I just said that because they're both like uncomfortable topics, he just wanted the reader to actually be uncomfortable when reading it. So to try to bring it into light that this is actually happening. This is actually happening.
You know, Ariane, that's a good point. Baldwin loves to deal with uncomfort. Like he likes to make the reader uncomfortable, right? He likes to deal with themes that are taboo, right? He likes to deal with pain. He likes to produce beauty out of pain. So you hit the nail on the head with that uncomfortability, right? That's absolutely a thing. Anybody else have an idea as to what the significance of the intersection of violence and sexuality come into play?
I would say that maybe he's bringing like reality like into our like mind, because what white people do, especially like in education, like we're not taught like these gruesome things. we're only taught like, oh, it happened, but like we stopped it or whatever. It's never like they never taught us like more than, oh, there was just slavery. They never got into it. They never like wanted to touch on the subject. So I feel like what he does is that he brings it out and he shows like what like really went down and how it really happened.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and then actually, Cecilia, you brought another Baldwin tenet to my mind. The Baldwinian notion of love. This is something that you guys should write down also, right? The Baldwinian notion of love. And it's not like your romantic holding hands, walking in the park, kissing, I love you, love. Nah, that's not what he's talking about. He's talking about a love that literally rips you apart, right? It tears down all the legends and all the fallacies that you tell yourself about yourself, right? And it shows you who you truly are at the core of yourself, right? He uses like mirrors, windows, water, things that reflect themselves, that reflect yourself to you as symbols of love, right? I like to describe it like this. If you're about to go out for the evening and you have an outfit in your head, right? And in your head, this outfit is on point, shit is dope, everything's put together, it's coordinated, you're good to go, right? But before you leave the house, you're going to check that mirror to make sure that the image in your head is actually reflecting how you look on the outside, right? Baldwin would say love is that mirror because it's going to show you not how you think you look, but how you really look. Like, nah, bro, your pants is wrinkled. Like, nah, you need to fix the hem of your pants. That shit's it's going to tell you what you really look like, right? So this is the work that Baldwin says love should do. One of the quotes that he's famous for is saying, if I love you, if I truly love you, I must make you conscious of the things that you're not aware of, right? So this is how Baldwinian love comes into play. So in certain other texts, he talks about the need to love white people, right? And initially when you read it, it's like, boy, they doing all this stuff to us, and you talking about loving them? No, fuck that, right? I ain't trying to hear that shit, right? But that's not what he's talking about. He's talking about a love that strips them down and breaks down the lies that hold up whiteness, right? And show them for who they truly are. And this is what he's doing in that text, right? He's showing America for what it truly is, right? He's showing the white psyche for what it truly is, right? Let's not deal with the legend. Let's deal with the actuality of what it is. There's another thinker named Frantz Fanon from, he's a Martinican thinker, but he was trained in France, in French schools, or Sorbonne. He says that all phobias, so all fears, stem from repressed sexual desires. I'm gonna say that one more time. All fears, all phobias stem from repressed sexual desires. And he goes further to say in the book, Black Skin, White Mask, so the white woman who is afraid of the black man has a deep-seated desire to have sexual intercourse with the black man, right? So all phobia is produced from a repressed sexual desire. Think about Jesse, right? When he gets bored with his wife, what did he used to do? Go to the black side of town and arrest black women, right? Repressed sexual desire, right? One of my favorite scholars, ancestors, and thinkers, revolutionaries, is this brother Kwame Ture, or Stokely Carmichael. He's famous for saying that when the colonizer went into Africa and he's seen all the black women with their chest exposed, all the African women with their chest exposed, he said he made them put on shirts to make them more civilized, right? This is what his excuse was. But the real reason is he could not control himself looking at the bare-breasted black women, right? Repressed sexual desire. So all phobias stem from a repressed sexual desire. So if we were to use this theory from Fanon and apply it to what Baldwin's talking about, think about what Jesse was going through, right? Couldn't get it up. He was afraid of what was going on, right? Let me see. Cassandra, Yeah, I mean that's what Fanon says. That's what he says. If you are to go from Fanon, what Cassandra asked, does that apply to all the phobias out there, right? It would be kind of weird because there's things like, think about like arachnophobia, fear of spiders, and like, so does that mean you're trying to fuck a spider? You know what I mean? So it gets weird. So I feel you, Cassandra, on being critical. She, she said she has a fear of clowns. So yeah, you know what? Look, we'll put that on pause. Let me contextualize that thing. This is taking a left turn. So when Baldwin was talking about the phobias, I'm sorry, when Fanon was talking about the phobias, it's in a book called Black Skin, White Mask, right? And it's dealing with how colonialism has impacted Black and white relations. So this is within the context of how Black and white people relate. But he's pulling from people like Freud. He's pulling from a lot of the psychologists of his time and before him, right? And they're dealing with, again, like things like the Oedipus complex and things of that nature. So I don't know where clowns will come into play. So let's just, for the sake of our conversation today, we'll say the phobias as it pertains to the Black and white experience. Yeah, I feel you, Cassandra. Good ass question. Yeah, that'll be a weird. I don't know, maybe have your boyfriend put on a clown mask and see how that play out. I don't know, maybe get over something. I don't know. But this idea of the repression becomes important, and also the interplay between the two. If we think about, so what is one of the major critiques of Thomas Jefferson? Does anybody know about one of the major critiques of Thomas Jefferson?
Critiques as in how?
Like, so one of the things that people fault him of, right? Like one of the things that they say that he, you know, should be, that he should be, you know, knocked down a peg, or he should not be so reverenced for. So while he's writing the Declaration of Independence, he's also a slave owner, right? He's also birthing children from the slave women, right? So he has a whole line of children that were produced from the women that were his slaves, right? So again, while he's talking about the inhumanity of these Black people, right, as he's keeping them in a slave state, he's impregnating and having multiple children by the same people, right? So this notion of sexuality and racism, they're tied together very strongly, right? Has anybody heard of Emmett Till? So Emmett Till was a 14-year-old boy who was from Chicago in the 1940s, I believe. Went down south to visit some family. I want to say Mississippi. I could be wrong. But story has it, he's from Chicago, right? So it's the north, and he's traveling down to the south. Story has it, he whistles or he says something unbecoming to a white woman. Word gets around town, they snatch him up, beat him profusely, throw him on the weight to him and throw him into the bottom of the river after like dragging him on the back of a truck through the city. They get the body back, get him back to Chicago, and the mom decides to have an open casket so the world could see what was done to her son, right? But the significance, all that he did supposedly was whistle at this white woman, right? And that enacted all of this brutality on him, right? How many white women falsely accuse people of color of rape when really it was consensual and their real desire was to be with that individual, but when they get caught, we're gonna claim rape, right? So again, these repressed desires, they produce these circumstances that allows violence to be enacted on the Black body. And this is what Baldwin wants us to get to understand, right? The intersection of this notion or this idea of sexuality and how violence becomes played out at that level, right? So this is what Baldwin gets us to think about. And then most importantly, that racism has an affect not only on the victims of racism, right? So Black folks, brown folks, red folks, right? but more importantly, it has an affect on the victimizer of racism. And you see in this story how what Jesse was doing, it literally fucked him up. It kept him up at night. He couldn't sleep. He couldn't perform his duties as a husband, right? Like it impacted the way that he moved through the world. And so what Baldwin wants us to walk away with is this system of marginalization, this system of terrorism, this system of oppression is not only a cancer for those who are being victimized, right? Those who enact this victimization are also being plagued by this as well. To take it back to Frantz Fanon, he was a psychiatrist in the Algerian state at the time that the Algerian anti-colonial revolution was taking place. What he was able to do, again, so he's a psychiatrist, right? So he would see the Algerians that were getting abused by the French colonizers, and then he would also see the French soldiers who were doing the abuse of the Algerians, right? And what he would see is that the ones that were doing the abuse was also being impacted. Their mental state was deteriorating, right? So, and what he mentioned was the way that they would respond to the colonized citizen, right? So there's like how Jesse was beating the boy in the cell, right? That's a trained way to respond to someone talking back to you or someone challenging you, right? So Fanon would say he would see that same type of behavior play out in the home of the French soldier, right? So if his wife said something that he didn't like, instead of reasoning with her, he would respond with violence. If his son said something he didn't like, instead of reasoning with his son, he would respond with violence. The same type of violence that he would respond to the Algerian with, right? So again, this deterioration of the mental state and the spiritual state of even those who do that violence. All of y'all talked about how disturbing it was to read the descriptive images that Baldwin articulates, right? What type of mental state did you have to be in to want to go and watch something like that, right? To see something like that and have that bring a smile upon your face, right? What type of human are you, right? What level of inhumanity is flowing through your veins to where you see this as something as entertainment, right? To the point that this arouses you, right? What type of spiritual, emotional, and mental decadence are you in to operate at this level? To take home somebody's reproductive organs as a souvenir, to take somebody's foot home as a souvenir, somebody's hand home as a souvenir, right? What is your mental state? This book was written in 48, right? This is 2020. That shit was happening before Baldwin, and this shit is happening all the way till today, right? There was people lynched this summer. There was literally people lynched this summer, right? So where are we at in dealing with these issues, right? Why have we not gotten around or beyond these issues, right? What does it say about our ability as a society to deal with truth? These are some of the questions that Baldwin wants us to think about as it pertains to this story. Let me get two questions just about the significance of story, or two comments, excuse me, about the significance of story as it pertains to what Baldwin was doing, and we'll call it a day. Was the use of story effective? Was it ineffective? Why do you think he chose the story?
Well, I think it was effective because, like I said earlier, about it making the reader uncomfortable, to try to bring the light that this is happening, that this was happening, that everything, like, it's going on and it needs to be brought to attention. It's supposed to make people uncomfortable. Just like, what was the book? It's slipping my mind, but the one where the white lawyer has to defend the black man knowingly. Even though.
What's it? Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Like the old like Mice and Men, or what's that shit called?
Yeah.
To Kill a
But
Mockingbird.
yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Like it needs to be brought to light.
Yeah. Anybody else? Why the story becomes significant? Hey, Cassandra, just speak your point. It's a good point. Why don't you speak up? And then we'll go to Eileen.
Okay, I haven't been speaking because there's been a lot of construction going around. I want to be quiet. But basically what I'm trying to say is through the use of imagery, when authors use it is to create a description or image inside the reader's head to place them into the setting, which I always think is very effective because you can always just hear a story and you're like, yeah, okay. But when you're physically like being able to see it, how do you explain it? How he was able to just like put you into what was happening and all the graphics around it, you just felt like, I don't know.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, Cassandra. And to me, and again, that's why Baldwin is my favorite writer. I mean, like, you don't see it coming to play in this particular story, but he can describe a smell of a street. Like, he'll describe a smell of a street in Harlem, and you're literally in Harlem. And to me, that's something that Baldwin is in a class of his own as it pertains to Dune. Eileen, were you going to say something?
I was just gonna say how like this whole like I guess passage reminded me of like that one quote that was like, art should disturb the comfortable and comfort the disturbed. Like that's the main like kind of idea I was getting while reading this passage.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. And it's a twofold point, right? Because one, this is art. Like we consider this as art, right? And I think it being in story format lends us to understanding it a little bit more as art, right? We don't typically put like essays and intellectual text as art, but this is art, and there's a story and there's a message that's being transmitted through this story, right? And it allows a little bit more flexibility in the way that he's able to produce his story. I would encourage, if you guys have some time, read more of Baldwin. I mean, especially in our present, the timeliness of his words is crazy. The Fire Next Time is always a good starting point to engage Baldwin. He has really good novels also. There's a book called Another Country, which is a novel, and it's really good. On Netflix, if you guys have Netflix, there's a documentary about Baldwin. It's called I Am Not Your Negro. Very, very good documentary. It's composed of the book No Name in the Street, which is a collection of essays, which is my favorite work by Baldwin. And it's comprised of the book Fire Next Time and a little bit of the book A Devil Finds Work. But essentially, it's those three essays kind of mashed together, and they produce a documentary out of it. And it's on Netflix and I believe Hulu. But if you have some time, yeah, definitely check it out. So that's going to be it for today. Next week, there is no reading. We're going to do a midterm review on next Tuesday, and then I'll have the midterm out to you guys by Friday, and then you'll have till Tuesday to get that back to me. But we'll go over all of that in a little bit more detail, just so you know. 5 essay questions. You're responsible for answering 3 of the 5 questions, and then you want to make sure that you're using theoretical frameworks when you're answering those questions. But we'll take some time next week to go through all of that. So relax, there's no reading or anything like that. Refresh your notes. Make sure that all of your journals are up to date, because you're going to turn in your journals along with the midterm. So we'll spend next week going over our journals and doing a midterm review. Is there any other questions for me? All right, you guys, have a great week, and I will see you guys next Tuesday.
Thank you, Professor.
All right, you guys have a good one.